After parting ways, High King Elisar continued on his route with his hosts, moving leisurely toward the settlement of Dunlarak. Meanwhile, King Eomer of Rohan had already reached Bairich, the capital of the Dunlandings, and began the siege alongside his raiders. In this stronghold was Yaktak, the king of the Dunlandings, along with about 300 warriors prepared to defend their king and homeland to the last drop of their blood. Yaktak had resolved not to kneel to the king of Rohan, and after a fierce speech, he armed himself with his axe and led his wild fighters in the defense of Bairich. Before that battle commenced, we returned to Minas Morgul, now renamed Minas Ithil, where Faramir and 2 scouts had entered Shelob's lair. By the grace of the Vala, these brave men of Gondor didn't encounter the creature, who was still recovering from her encounter with Samwise Gamgee. After a few hours, the scouts and Faramir reached the entrance of Cirith Ungol, where they spotted several orcs who had fled from Minas Morgul, along with hundreds more arriving from the other side of the tower. After the fall of Sauron and the destruction of Barad-dûr, the orcs had been forced to flee, desperate to avoid certain death from the eruption of Mount Doom. Many of these orcs had survived and taken refuge in the fortresses, caves, and mountains at Mordor's fringes, seeing Cirith Ungol as temporary shelter from danger. The new steward of Gondor had gathered enough information to return to Minas Ithil and prepare the fortress troops to eliminate the orcs and reclaim Cirith Ungol. At the same time, Faramir was readying his men to drive out the orcs. The Prince of Dol Amroth, Imrail, had spotted a group of orcs scattered in retreat. Within minutes, he prepared his cavalry, mounted his steed, and set off to pursue and annihilate this orc detachment, which was heading quickly south towards the region of Hudun. The Knights of Dol Amroth soon overtook the orcs and crushed them with our ward, leaving no orc alive. With this victory, the region of Hudun came under full control of the armies of the reunited kingdom. Imrail positioned his knights at the region's entrance to monitor all movements in the area. The Prince of Dol Amroth also sent 2 of his best riders to spy on the movements of the men of the East, as he was certain they would attack eventually, remaining loyal to the Dark Lord despite his defeat. In this tale, we have spoken of men, elves, and orcs, but the dwarves too were preparing to reclaim what once belonged to them. After the Battle of Dale and the ascension of Thorin III Stonehelm to the throne, he summoned all dwarves willing to fight, dwarves from Erebor, the Iron Hills, and the Grey Mountains, who gathered to confront one of the northern threats, the orcs of Gundabad. Despite the fall of their lord, these orcs continued to raid nearby lands and kill any innocents who crossed their path. Additionally, the Danes' whole territory of Erebor had suffered repeated assaults by these snow orcs. Thus, the king of Erebor led his dwarves to Mount Gundabad and surrounded the fortress without hesitation. These orcs, filled with hatred for the dwarves, were ready to shed the blood of their fierce enemies. Before the siege of Mount Gundabad, Thorin III Stonehelm requested that King Bard II of Dale prepare his army. and promised that once his dwarves had devastated Gundabad, they would return to Erebor and together prepare to defend their lands or potentially launch an offensive against the territories of the Easterlings. Meanwhile, after the Battle of the Black Gate, Gimli, son of Gloin, had taken refuge with some dwarfs in the Glittering Caves, where he began constructing a small new dwarven settlement, staying close to his friends Legolas and Aragorn. Before settling in these caves, however, Gimli gathered several dwarfs and traveled to Erebor, declaring his intentions to reclaim the kingdom of Khazad-dûm and avenge the death of his kinsman Balin. Many volunteered for this expedition, and Gimli assembled nearly 1,000 dwarfs, advancing through Mirkwood, controlled entirely by the elves, passing through the conquered Dol Guldur, where he once again met Lady Galadriel and Lord Celeborn. After resting for several hours, he tried to return to Galadriel the strands of her hair that had brought him such good fortune. Seeing Gimli still alive and having achieved several feats, Galadriel granted him 3 more strands of her golden hair, giving him confidence and luck. Finally, Gimli and his expedition reached Dimril Dale, where they set up camp. Suddenly, a horn echoed through the valley, and an army appeared on the horizon. Gimli, raising his axe, ordered his dwarfs to prepare for combat, but to his surprise, he recognized the banners of the ancient kingdom of Khazad-dûm and the dwarfs of the Blue Mountains. Friends, not foes, were approaching. At that moment, Dwalin, a relative of the legendary Thorin Oakenshield, appeared and wielding his axe declared, "We reclaimed Erebor in times past, and now we shall reclaim Khazad-dûm." And finally, he exclaimed, "Baruch Khazad! Khazad al-Menu!" With the arrival of reinforcements, Gimli was certain that the mines of Moria would be reclaimed and the goblins within them slaughtered. The new army camped, preparing several siege machines for the entry. Returning to the siege of Baerich, capital of the Dunlandings, King Eomer, having satisfied his desire for vengeance at the massacre of Dunedain, decided to follow Aragorn's approach and surround the settlements to starve it into surrender. After days without supplies, the Dunlandings prepared their forces and left the walls to confront the Rohirrim. Lacking archers, they found it impossible to evade the charges of Rohan's cavalry. Though they had around 100 pikemen to try to hold them back, Eomer split his riders into 2 groups to surround the enemy and swiftly eliminate the pikemen. The Rohirrim charged, but their tactics were only partially successful. The Dunlanding pikes devastated the cavalry. Regrouping, Eomer prepared his riders for another charge, aiming to crush the Dunlanding pikes. With the second charge, the cavalry massacred the Dunlanding pikemen, and their king charged directly at Eomer and his royal guard. In the ensuing melee, the elite Dunlanding warriors, armed with spears, shields, and thick armor comparable to the Uruk-hai, overpowered the Rohan forces. But finally, Eomer rallied his riders once more, executing a decisive charge that wiped out most of the Dunlanding's elite. Eomer faced Yaktak, the Dunlanding king, and with the help of his royal guard, defeated him. With the siege resolved, Eomer raised his spear in victory, claiming Baerich as another territory of the kingdom of Rohan. As Eomer secured this land, Aragorn arrived at Dunlarach. The Dunlendings there, however, were wiser, and upon seeing the banner of the reunited kingdom, opened the village gates. Their unarmed leader approached Elisar and knelt, explaining that news of Rohan's massacre at Dunyard had reached them, and they did not wish to suffer the same fate. He also mentioned that some of the warriors had changed sides after the Battle of Helm's Deep, fighting alongside Rohan and Elisar at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and they had no desire for conflict. Elisar accepted their surrender, taking Dunlarach without bloodshed. He left the surrendered leader in charge of the village, and the flag of the reunited kingdom now flew over these lands. Elisar continued northward, finally entering Eriador. As Aragorn reached Eriador, Faramir, the steward of Gondor, stood at the gates of Cirith Ungol with his army, ready to seize the bastion and eliminate the orcs who had escaped Sauron's downfall. Thus, the siege began, with around 600 soldiers of Gondor advancing to the gates. As the battering ram approached, a storm of arrows rained upon the orc defenders. Gondor's archers continued the barrage until the battering ram finally breached the gate. Enraged, the orcs charged out to defend the entrance and prevent Gondor's infantry from entering. After an hour of fierce combat, the soldiers of Gondor managed to defeat the orcs and Uruk legions. The surviving orcs fled, and Faramir's forces claimed victory. With this triumph, both entrances to Mordor were under the complete control of the reunited kingdom. Later, Faramir left a garrison to guard Cirith Ungol and returned to Minas Ithil, where he created an elite unit tasked with defending the reclaimed Númenórean city. This unit would be known as the Guards of Minas Ithil.